Participants who are not making the evening presentations introduce themselves in some detail tomorrow. We're spending a good deal of the day tomorrow in getting acquainted. So tonight we will be very brief with these introductory comments, and we'll simply ask first that Dean Moore of the School of Theology bring us a word of greeting, and then after that Bob Edgar, the president, and after that Paul Nagano. Now, Paul Nagano is the person who is most responsible for this event taking place at all. And I will just say a word now of explanation of who he is in relation to the conference, and then we'll just ask these three people to greet us. Jitsuo Morikawa, you've heard his name by now, I'm sure, had a dream about the emergence of the Pacific part of the world as extremely important for the future, and was concerned that the church was not beginning to think in terms of the Pacific as a unified area, or as a future unified and very important center for the life of the entire planet. That was not the whole of his dream, but a very important part of it. He was probably the first Asian American to rise to real prominence in the life of one of the major, predominantly Anglo denominations. And many of his admirers and friends have organized to carry on his legacy, and Paul will be telling you something about that. And it is that group of people who have raised a large part of the funding that has made this conference possible. So we'll want to hear from him both now and then occasionally throughout the conference, so that the Morikawa vision will not be forgotten as we proceed. But I can assure you, really the last thing Morikawa would want would that his name be even mentioned in this kind of a context. Alan, will you greet?
Thank you very much, John. I'm very happy to greet you and welcome you to our campus for this important conference. And much of the publicity, you've noticed that it's a historical discussion, and one that we expect to set a new standard for theological dialogue. I think it's probably fitting for the School of Theology to be one of the participating partners in this conference, because as many of you know, the School of Theology had its beginning in 1885, and our foremothers and our forefathers envisioned that this would be a school that would relate in a very serious and intentional way to the Pacific and to Asia. We have always had that dream that this is a school that would find its center in the Asian and Pacific culture. And in the real sense today, we're beginning to recognize how important the Asia and Pacific Center is to all of us, including this school. Mary Elizabeth Moore and I had our first trip to Asia this summer, visiting Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong. And Dr. Kwok, who spoke today, and you will hear again, was a wonderful hostess to us in Hong Kong. This morning she told the story about the publicity material on Northwest Airline, and that they referred to the exotic people of Asia. I think for me, I would much rather talk about the mystique, because for many of us, Asia is still a distant place in our experience and in our thinking. And because we know so little about this great part of the world, and so little about the significant contribution that the Asian people and the Asian churches have made to the life of human civilization and to all of us, it continues to have something of a mystique for many of us. I hope out of this conference and in the dialogue that will result, that the mystique might come to some real, meaningful reality in which we can begin to learn in a very significant way the contribution of the Asian people and of Asian theological thinking to the life of all of us. So I'm very privileged to welcome you. I want to say in conclusion that this conference has been made possible in part because of a very significant contribution that William Miller made to the School of Theology in order that we might have some projects such as this one. Bill Miller provided funding for theological and ethical dialogue, and the trust which he established at the School of Theology has contributed to this conference. I don't think Bill has arrived yet. My last word, he was coming. John, have you heard otherwise?
I have not.
Yes. Well, 2 weeks ago he indicated that he would be here and was very eager to be a part of this conference. But I just want you to know that this memorial trust that Bill Miller gave in behalf of his late wife and his mother is an important part of the financial support of this conference. It's my real happy to present to you my colleague and friend, the president of this school, Robert Edgar.
I too want to welcome all of you to the School of Theology here at Claremont. Alan Moore and Mary Elizabeth Moore were really, like John the Baptist, the forerunners for our school in heading off to Japan and Korea this past year. I plan to go in April of this year to explore some of the same areas that Alan and Mary Elizabeth visited and came back with a great deal of excitement. I've been president of the School of Theology here at Claremont for the past 16 months, and in these 16 months we've seen some renewal of spirit here in the campus. And over the last week we've seen the culmination of that spirit. While you're here during the conference, I hope you'll take some time to go over to our Kresge Chapel and see a painting that was largely influenced by a Pacific Rim artist. It was created by Beth Neville, who for 25 years has been an artist in Boston and New York. And this painting is some 70 foot by 5 foot long and is patterned to a small degree on some of the Pacific area scrolls and scroll paintings. It also uses symbolism of volcanoes, and we know that that is a connecting force on planet Earth. As I look across and see many of you here tonight, you have been with us for several days as we've prayed together and cried together and laughed together and listened carefully to some prophetic voices. Dr. Kwok spoke yesterday and reminded us that 25% of the world's population lives in China. I speak around the community about the fact that more than half of all the people who ever lived on planet Earth are alive today. When I entered the United States Congress in 1975, we had but 4 billion persons on planet Earth. We're now at 5.4 billion, and just in the next 9 years, we'll add 960 million persons to the population of planet Earth. Many of those persons live in the area that we're going to study and look at the church's response to. So I'm excited about your being here. I'm particularly excited about the leadership and quality of the speakers that will be making presentations. And I want to give special tribute and honor to John Cobb. John helped to open the conference, and many of you know him and his leadership over the years. John is one of our distinguished former faculty members who still is on the faculty at the graduate school. We've adopted him forever as our leading theologian. And John has such a gentle spirit. Just yesterday, when one of the keynote speakers for this conference was unable to come because of illness, we referred to John as second string. And he stepped in and talked about liberation theology yesterday and gave an excellent presentation. So I hope all of you, as you celebrate in this conference, will find a warm welcome at the School of Theology. And I hope now you'll show your appreciation to the many years of leadership that has brought to our community this high-level scholarship of John Cobb. Let's give him a round of applause.
I would like to add my word of welcome, all of you precious ones here together tonight. You are very, very important because in a sense you are a pioneer as you shape the future of the Pacific Rim nations. And I really believe that people who are involved in theology have a very, very important role to play because we set the value system and the ideology and the direction, the vision for the community. It's very important. And so how wonderful that we could come together with a sense of responsibility as Christian people to look forward to the future of the Pacific region. I came this afternoon on the airplane and I sat next to a businessman and we got a talking and he told me a story. I thought it might be appropriate. He said that there were a group of Buddhists and a group of Muslims that died and they went to heaven. And when they went to heaven, there was another group that was meeting separately from all the rest. And a Buddhist asked the Muslim, "Who are those folks?" And the Muslim said, "Oh, they're Christians. They think they're the only ones here." We live in a world in which we are one great big family. It's not realized in history, it's not realized in the Pacific Rim, but I think this is one of our responsibilities, that we might have the kind of society, and perhaps even as we gather together here, we might be just a microcosm of what we'd like to see for the entirety of the Pacific and for God's wonderful world. I want to just mention tonight a little bit about Dr. Morikawa's vision. He stated in one of his last messages these words, and he died in July of 1987. He said, "The overall goal of the conference is to begin an in-depth exploration of the contributions rising from the Pacific and Asian American context in the formation of theologies and religious ideologies which have practical meaning in the community." He goes on to say, "My particular concern toward the formation of theologies is what addresses and illumines public life, corporate structures, institutional reality, which deals with political, economic, and social issues. And particularly do we need theological insight into harnessing for human and public good the critical issues I have enumerated: economics, ecology, religions, science, and technology. The future of the Pacific appears to be contingent on, at least in how these issues are dealt with." We'll be dealing with these issues, and I pray that we will come forth with a real vision and a direction, and corporately we might raise the consciousness level of our world to the tremendous needs in the future, the shaping of the future of the Pacific arena. You are very important. You are very important. And I pray that as we wrestle together and struggle together, we will come out with some great understanding that will have a real effect on the future. Welcome. Thank you for coming, especially those of you who've traveled distances. Thank you for coming. And it's going to be a real intense work session. Let's struggle together and come through with those viable answers that will really affect the history of the future. Thank you so much.
We think you will find in your packets most of the things you need to know in terms of technical matters, so we want to keep that kind of discussion this evening to an absolute minimum. We will be having sessions in the evening videotaped, and I think that there are some forms for order forms that you'd like to pass out at this time. Okay, we'll try to do that as quickly as possible. Let me just say one other thing about our facilities. Our evening sessions, excuse me, will be here. But most of the sessions during the day will be in Albrecht Auditorium. And you'll find a map that will show you how to get there and so forth and so on. But my concern is to say that that is set up in a way that will be much more conducive to group discussion than this kind of an auditorium is. So we're very happy that we could have that. Unfortunately, we could not get that for tomorrow morning. So the tomorrow morning session will be here, and all the subsequent sessions, except the evening sessions, will be in Albrecht. You will find that material, I think, on your schedule, but I thought perhaps it would be well to emphasize it. Now, as these forms are being passed out, is there anything that needs to be said about them? Yes, Kathy? Oh, yes. Dr. Quintos will be speaking to us a little later this evening, and if you would like to get a copy of her paper, you can get one for $2 at the end of the program. Anything else? And do any of you who are members of our group have questions? I mean, there may be some technical issues that we think we've taken care of, but not taken care of from your point of view. Okay. You can, of course, speak to Kathy afterwards. She's the one who knows everything. We will be expressing our appreciation to her more formally at a later time, but I can assure you that her work is what has really made this thing happen. And the number of problems that arise in trying to bring people together from these great distances, and even then just locally in the arrangements, are more than they should be. But I think they're all worked out reasonably well. Now, this evening, before we enter into our lecture and discussion format, we are having a worship service, and I'm delighted to introduce Mary Elizabeth Moore, Professor of Theology and Religious Christian Education at the School of Theology, who will be our worship leader for the evening. So, please.
We invite you into evening prayers. You'll notice in the worship bulletin that the bold words are the ones that you will say, and also you will discover that 2 times of silent prayers are built into the worship service so that you're prepared for that. Did everyone get a copy of the evening prayer service? If you didn't, please raise your hand, because some people in the back have them and will pass them out to you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form or void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved across the waters. Come celebrate the beginning. Come celebrate the time before all time. Come celebrate the beginning and the mystery hiding there.
Beneath the
the mystery in the womb of the living water, giving birth to earth and sea and people and culture. And now let's stand and all turn to face the center of the room, facing one another. We come together as Christians who face the Pacific. We are divided by the giant Pacific waters, and we are bound together by them as they flow around us. Let us come together now.
Reaching across the waters to learn who we are and who we may be together.
The voice of love has many tongues. It's been here many years. It makes no difference how it's sung, as long as someone hears. Please sing with me. The voice of love has many tongues. It's been here many years. It makes no difference how it's sung, as long as someone hears. The voice of love has many tongues. It's been here many years. It makes no difference how it's sung, as long as someone hears.
You may be seated. We bring our pains and wounds to one another and to God. We bring our hopes and dreams, our fears, regrets, and shame. And now we pray our intercessions in the words of the Pacific Conference of Churches. Lord, God of justice and peace, who stands with those who are poor, who ask us to be the voice of the voiceless, we call upon you for those who have suffered the injustices of war and greed.
From the depths of our being, we cry to you, Lord. Hear our cry and listen to our prayers.
For those Pacific people whose precious land and sea have been ravaged by nuclear explosions. For those who are suffering this day from disease, genetic malformation, and the loss of those they love as a result of nuclear radiation. May their spirits not be broken by their body's pain.
From the depths of our being, we cry to you, Lord. Hear our cry and listen to our prayers.
We We pray that your promise of justice may become real to those for whom we pray, and may become real for us. May they and we be released to live in freedom and in love.
From the depths of our being, we cry to you, Lord. Hear our cry and listen to our prayers. For you are gracious, and there is in you that which is to be feared, that which forgives, that which strengthens, and that which comforts.
For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. As God's Spirit fills the earth and waters cover the sea, the Spirit of God fills our gathering, and we live with God's promise of prophetic power and vision.
A reading from the Gospel of Luke, the 4th chapter, verses 16 through 21. When Jesus came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. Yahweh has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And Jesus rolled back the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Here ends the reading of God's holy word.
As we prepare to sing a hymn of prophecy, we invite you to join into the spirit of weaving, and we're going to pass among you and give you a ribbon at the end of each aisle. We invite you to pass it down the aisle and be creative so that each person may touch the stream of life, and we'll all be bound together as we prepare and begin to sing the hymn.
God, you call us to be spinning threads of justice and shalom in new patterns of creation in which all may find their home. Gathering up life's varied fibers, every color, every hue. Grant us your creative vision as we weave our world anew. Where earth's fragile web is raveling, help us mend those broken strands. On the looms of understanding, reweave blessings from the land. With the Spirit's restless shuttle, bringing health where once was pain. May our our bold, courageous actions knit creation whole again. When our violent search for power ends in life shattered and torn, weave the fabric of compassion into hope and life reborn. Where injustice rules as tyrant, give us courage, God, to dare. Move our dreams to loving action, make our lives enacted prayer. With the chords of righteous anger, God's design our warp and woof, taking up the prophet's mantle, we speak boldly truth in love. God, you call us to be weavers of the blessings that you give. Fill us with creative passion, peace and justice now to live.
And now, in hope that what we weave together in these few days will make a difference in the world, will be sacred, will be touched by the Spirit, and blessed by the hope that we bring here tonight. So I invite you to raise your ribbon high and celebrate the possibilities of our time together. May the earth be full of knowledge, and the peoples of this gathering be moved by the spirit of vision and mutuality as the Spirit of God moves across the face of the waters. Amen.
Thank you very much, Mary Elizabeth Moore, for the beautiful spirit and symbolism and imagery with which you have woven us together as we begin this event. I think I would like to say just a couple more words about what we are hoping to do and how that's related to what's happening this evening. The topic of understanding our own cultures and our own Christian responsibility in various parts of the Pacific Basin in relationship to the entire Pacific Basin is one that has still barely been treated. And I think I could say that in every case, when we invited people to speak on the topic, the first reaction was, well, what is this all about? This is something different from what we have been trying to do and thinking about in the past. I don't think that that is the reason that Professor Chen Zemin, after having accepted the invitation to come, finally declined. I think he accepted the invitation. I wrote him back and then asked him to give this opening address, and then a few months later I got a letter saying he had to do something else. And he did indicate his personal hesitation about tackling a topic of that sort. Well, I'm saying this to say that I think all of our speakers have felt that this is a rather odd topic. It's not quite what they've been thinking about. Asians have been thinking about Asia, and North Americans have been thinking about North America. Latin Americans have certainly been thinking about Latin America, and I think there's been a sense of Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. But to think of all of this as somehow interconnected and woven together has not been the usual way. Well, when Professor Chen Zemin decided this was too much for him, we had to decide who would be able to take on a task of this magnitude. And of course the answer is none of us can take it on alone. This is what we're taking on collectively as a group. But we turned rather late in the game then to Dr. Lily Quintos from the Philippines, who is at the present time in Canada. Now, I became acquainted with her through Professor C.S. Sung, who helped us a great deal at an early stage in identifying the peoples who we could bring together in many parts of the world. And I have met Dr. Quintos for the first time just now. And so I was asking Dr. Sung, it's rather odd, isn't it, to ask the respondent to help with the introduction, but he and Dr. Quintos have worked together some in the past as well. I will say just another word about this whole business of introductions. I mentioned before, we really want to give everyone here time and space to introduce themselves in some depth. And I think that Dr. Quintos' paper will help us to understand who she is in a deeper way. It has certainly helped me in that respect. Dr. Sung is a person known, I'm sure, to most of you. Many think that he has been the leader in developing an Asian theology, and certainly he has played that role not only for the people of Taiwan, but in stimulating this kind of thinking on a much wider basis. He has taught, of course, in Taiwan. He's taught in this country. He's now teaching in Japan. And we all look to him for continuing leadership and also especially for leadership in this conference. So I'm going to ask him to tell us something of his past personal relations with Dr. Quintos, and then we'll ask Dr. Quintos to address us.
Thank you very much. I wish I knew more about Dr. Quintos. And
We'll know more by the end of the
yes, that's right. When Professor Cobb asked me to say a few words about Dr. Quintos, I began thinking who she is, racking my memories of my association with her during the past few years. And the first time I came across her was a meeting consultation in Kyoto, where we inaugurated a program called Program for Theology and Cultures in Asia. I may refer to that towards the end of my comment response to her paper. There she also gave us a very excellent, stimulating paper and helped us a great deal in launching this program in Asia. Then more recently, 2 years ago, she was invited to be the Henry Luce Scholar at Pacific School of Religion. She was there for 1 semester. My school was very, very privileged and enriched by the presence of Dr. Quintos and what she had to share with us. So our paths come and go, but we are all part of the theological family, growing theological family in Asia and in on this Pacific Rim. So I'm very, very grateful that Dr. Quintos agreed to open our consultation with her paper, and it will be my great privilege to respond to her and after she has finished her lecture. Dr. Quintos.
Thank you. Yes. As I stand here before you, I'm reminded of a story that I heard recently. It's about a pastor who stood up to give his sermon, and he said, as he looked at his audience, "This church needs a chandelier." And a man in the back called out and said, "I disagree, Pastor. In the first place, what we need here in this church is something else. No one in this church can spell adultery. And in the second place, no one in this here church knows how to use it. And in the third place, what we need in this here church is light. My topic for tonight is Christian responsibility for Pacific civilization, some challenges from the contemporary Philippine context. The Philippines is unique among the countries of the East in that it has, for hundreds of years, absorbed a Western culture, a Western pattern of thinking, a Western way of living, which one will not find to the same extent anywhere else. We have taken not only the external trappings of Western culture, but we have taken its faith, its theology, and its philosophical categories. We have the cultural heritage of our geographical position on the world map, and we have the experience of centuries with the European values which brought us the Christian faith and the Greek categories of thought. We have also absorbed a good deal of the pragmatism of the New World, while all the time we remain an Eastern people. In thinking how to proceed with this paper, the word responsibility kept coming back to me. There are two ways of looking at it, at this word responsibility. First, the sense in which I am responsible for a particular event or action taking place. And second, the sense in which a person is able to respond to a need and takes, in that sense, responsibility for the well-being of a nation, person, or one's world and culture. When I think of responsibility in the first sense, I think of the many aspects of colonial rule and their impact on the countries of Asia and the Pacific, the Philippines in particular. I think of all the negative effects of domination with their far-reaching consequences on the one hand, and the positive influence, the growth, Christian faith, and education, to mention a few, on the other. When I think of responsibility in the second sense, immediately what comes to mind are the complicated problems connected with justice on a national and international scale, for which every Christian is called upon to be responsible. Unemployment, malnutrition, concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, the many people living under subhuman conditions, care for the earth, women's issues, and so on. It is hoped that as more details begin to unfold, you will be able to keep in mind the implication and sense of the word responsible as it is applied in this paper, though at times I will not refer to it explicitly. In this paper, I will provide a framework and perspective taken from Philippine history to give vividness to this study. I will also give an account of some significant events and people. This short expose will include items which may seem random and unconnected, but they all add up to what brought the Philippines where it is now at the dawn of the 21st century. The second part is a presentation of some major convictions or affirmations. It is my hope that if not all of these affirmations will already hint at the place and contribution the Philippine Church wishes to make and is making to the Asian Pacific scene. The land and people. The Philippines, so often romantically described by poets as the Pearl of the Orient Seas, is one of the largest island groups in the world, with 7,107 islands and islets lying off the southeast coast of the Asian mainland between Taiwan and Borneo. It is bounded in the west by the South China Sea, the Sulu and Celebes Seas in the south, and the Bashi Channel in the north. Its strategic position places the Philippines at the crossroads of international travel lanes. From the ashes of World War II, on December 7th, all of you will remember, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The massacre of the Filipino people began a week later. Manila was the most ravaged city in the world. In spite of this tragedy, the Filipino people found hope in the prospect of full independence, as had been promised by the United States before the war broke out. After the end of World War II, and after nearly 50 years of colonial rule, the United States formally transferred sovereignty to the Republic of the Philippines on July 4th, 1946, even as the city of Manila lay in shambles. The problems which faced the fledgling republic were not only enormous, but seemed insurmountable. The treasury was empty, warehouses and inter-island shipping were totally destroyed, and the ports were blocked by wreckage. Rice mills were destroyed, and the hemp industry was ruined. Yet in some ways, the Philippines may be considered blessed for having been tutored by two different major, yet complementary cultures. Christianity had been introduced by Spain. So historically, the Catholic Church was part of the established order in Philippine society. Basilicas, cathedrals, and town fiestas are some of the marks of more than 400 years of Spanish colonialism. Filipinos, even while still hurting from the memories of 3.5 centuries of Spanish rule, were intrigued by the different atmosphere of the American occupation, especially its benevolence, good humor, and democratic motivations. From the Americans, Filipinos acquired a passion for political life and a taste for the city hall politics of their mayors and congressmen as these dealt with constituents. A nation in turmoil. The political and social history of the Philippines during the period of 1972 to 1986 was dominated by one overriding factor, the declaration of martial law. Very slowly, Filipinos are beginning to realize fully the extent of Marcos' success in destroying their democratic institutions in so many other ways beyond direct repression and the denial of human rights. Over the last 12 years, enormous vitality and creativity are being manifested by the church and other church-related groups in the struggle for a just society. Under the oppressive pressure of martial law, a significant number among the Philippine hierarchy and religious congregations of women and men accepted the challenge of becoming a prophetic church. The joint associations of major superiors of men and women religious of the Philippines and the Association of Local Superiors of Women Religious of the Archdiocese of Manila created task forces to conscientize the wider community and to counter the injustices being perpetrated by Marcos people. Ecclesial structures were creatively modified to make of the church a space for authentic participation and a sacrament of community power. Such initiatives were instrumental in creating a climate in which secular movements centered on human rights became quite active. The superiors of the different religious communities encouraged their membership to stand in solidarity with the poor, to share, or in some cases to live with the poor. Church-sponsored organizations worked among people in the slums or in rural plantations with farmers and among political prisoners. The church continues as their most effective defense against further exploitation and abuse. What seemed to sustain these groups was the clear identification of the demands of their faith with a concrete path of witness to be followed. So after a decade of oppression under a corrupt dictator and an even worse period of economic mismanagement, wasteful borrowing, and corruption in the country, the nation still remains vibrant, resilient, symbolized by the bamboo, its national tree. The capacity to hang on, to persevere in the face of disasters, natural or man-made, are the nation's very characteristic. The miracle of EDSA. EDSA is the thoroughfare in Quezon City that runs between Camp Aguinaldo and Camp Crame, the two military installations where the drama of the revolution played itself out. As one reflects upon the February 1986 event, known as the Philippine Exodus, it becomes clear that the essential element, the intrinsic constitutive component of the soul of Filipinos, is their deep Christian faith, and that this is very much a part of Philippine culture. It was the people's faith, and that became the people's power, drawn into action by the invisible hand of God. We note also during the revolution the expression of a people's unified act of self-transcendence, the readiness to risk unto death if need be, for the sake of the nation and for the values they were fighting for, freedom and justice. Father Tony Lambino of the Society of Jesus, reflecting on the meaning of Christian culture with particular reference to the event of February 1986, has this to say, and I quote, "We realize the power of Christian symbols. The Filipino soldiers peering behind those holes were people who at their mother's lap learned the meaning of the cross and of rosaries and images of Our Lady of Fatima. At that crucial moment on EDSA, the power of these symbols came to the fore. It was our Christian culture that lent the needed horizon for the peaceful revolution. On EDSA, we saw the meaning of cultural and religious structures." End of quote. The nation under Cory Aquino. With Cory Aquino's elevation to the presidency, significant changes have taken place towards achieving normalcy. At the start of her term, she pledged to restore democracy, to reverse the downward spiral of economy, and to stop the communist rebel advance. Within the first years of her administration, she did all three, although the economy went down again after the coup in December 1989. The Philippines, like most of the Southeast Asian countries, has inherited a colonial economy, the dominant feature of which is a structural dualism reflected in a large traditional agricultural sector existing side by side with a smaller group engaged in commercial activities and manufacturing. On both fronts, the nation has achieved a sustained growth. However, despite substantial gains, the Philippines is still faced with many obstacles. The country is still plagued with corruption. As one writer puts it, the genie of corruption and selfishness unleashed by Marcos haven't been put back into the bottle. Some efforts at theologizing. Reflecting upon Jitsu Morikawa's thoughts which inspired this conference, especially where he insists on the need for a theology of the Pacific region, my thoughts return to the concrete chain of events that started since Marcos' usurpation of power and culminated at EDSA, and all the lines that link with that chain. Here we have the elements for doing an authentic Filipino theology. People who were at EDSA told their story, and the immediate confrontation with pain, danger, fear of affliction stirs protest and provokes questions. But the experience was at that point mute and inarticulate. It needed words if its human significance was to be expressed. Human experience finds a voice in narrative, in a storyline, in which it is intensified, crystallized, and where its manifold contours are displayed. Didn't C.S. Song say, theology is born when we meet persons in their life and history? Whenever people speak of the miracle of EDSA, they will inevitably speak of the divine intervention. They have worked out reflectively in prayer and in faith what God was doing in them and through them, as well as for them. Arevalo believes that the storyline did reveal for them what their God is like, as God moved among them, and what they were called to do as they allowed themselves to be grasped by God. As the story was told again and again, and people prayed in faith to find out what God was saying to them, their own story became a disclosure story. The bishops did their own theological reflection. Was the church's role in the February Revolution a purely political matter which it had no business dirtying itself with? Or was the church's involvement in an act that flowed from the gospel? Bishop Claver, echoing the feeling of people in general, says that the revolution succeeded not only because an army general and a politician dared to oppose the dictator, nor because a widow had earlier launched a campaign of civil disobedience to overthrow the results of a sham election, nor because the business community and the students, the middle class in general, had come out in full force to give teeth to her campaign. But the revolution succeeded also because, and especially because, people from all walks of life during the 4 fateful days of the revolution, in an extraordinary show of non-violent strength, joined hands and heart to prevent bloodshed, and in so doing worked out their own freedom. And behind all of them, in the midst of them, at times literally in front of them, was the church. Church and politics has been a burning issue within and without the Philippine church from the very day of Marcos' usurpation of power. The church's role in the revolution is something that embarrasses no end persons who believe the church has no competence whatsoever in secular matters, politics and economics especially, and must remain in the purely spiritual realm. If the church had preferred to spare itself this particular embarrassment, it would have been guilty of the most political of acts. By its silence, it would have given its approval to the regime of Marcos, and the consequences of such a stance would have been bloodshed, violence, and a continuing crisis which would have driven the nation deeper into self-destruction. The church injected into the revolution the one saving factor of faith and highlighted the primacy of the spiritual as no one else could have hoped to do. Some basic theological political affirmations. Number one, the church must continue to take an active role in shaping the direction and future of the country. However, if we do not want such a role to be merely a further instance of the struggle for power, we need to get beyond ideological legitimations to critical foundations. If the oppressed societies of our world are to have a future, we need to give a convincing account of the paradigm of the true demands of human transcendence. Brandon Lovett suggests that creativity involves insight into the nature of whatever human good is being destroyed. Most elaborate systems of structural violence, Lovett claims, did not come into existence without the collusion of many people, including ourselves. If this is so, it becomes extremely difficult for us to identify accurately the true sources and extent of injustice present in ourselves and in the world against which we must take a stand. We realize, of course, that without accurate identification of the source of injustice, our most sincere efforts can be undermined by the very evil existing in them that needs to be overcome. Consistent analysis of the real social condition of the Philippines only began in the early 70s and has now provided many people with tools of social analysis. These tools helped clarify for them the demonic structures of society to which they felt themselves called to transform in responsibility. However, it has become clear to all concerned, with the real ongoing life in society, that structural analysis by itself is not enough. Simply to know what is evil, for example, the oppressive effects of martial law, cannot of itself show the appropriate and transforming response. Lovett suggests an alternative model to complement earlier models of social analysis, the integral human good model. The church operates under the law of the cross, and life under the law of the cross is actualized in the concrete mission whereby the church points to that scale of values which must operate in human earth and interhuman relations, and also clarifies which relations are appropriate between the social infrastructure and the cultural superstructure of society. The key strategy to this model is to outline the levels and complex interaction of the integral human good. In so doing, what constitutes a healthy society is explicated. The importance of this explication becomes clear, since we cannot presume that everyone knows the shape of the good that we are struggling for. Using the integral human good model, two objectives are achieved. First, a more accurate identification of the dimensions of the social evil to be overcome, and second, a more effective strategy for redeeming the situation. Fundamental to this model is the reappropriation of the true dynamics of centrality of human culture. Many aspects of Filipino culture simply disappeared as years went by during the Spanish regime. Literature was thriving in oral traditions of myth, legend, poetry, song, proverb, and the like. Religion, though not structured, was nevertheless a much elaborated and dominant element in Philippine culture, along with a complex legal system that defined traditional values, behavior, and practices. The many variations of indigenous architecture spoke to the needs of each locality. From the essay Filipinas Dentro de 100 Años, The Philippine a Century Hence by Dr. Jose Rizal, the national hero, I quote, "Soon after being subjected to the crown of Spain, these islands had support with their blood and the vigor of their young men, the wars and imperialistic ambitions of the Spaniards. At a terribly critical period in the life of any nation, the people had to undergo basic changes in government, in their laws, their usage, customs, religion, beliefs. The Philippine Islands were impoverished. Then began a new era. Little by little, they lost their old traditions, the mementos of their past. They gave up their writing, their songs, their poems, their laws, in order to learn by rote other teachings which they did not understand. They learned another system of aesthetics, different from that inspired by their climate and their manner of thinking. They were humbled, diminished in their own eyes, and they became ashamed of what was their own, while they admired and put excessive value on whatever was foreign and incomprehensible." End of quote. The model of the integral human good will further encourage contemporary Filipinos to work towards finding worth once again in what was once their very own culture. The value then of this model lies in its integral nature. Much of the healing needed in our times lies in overcoming dichotomies that should never have arisen in the first place. This model enables us also to see how the different levels of value are interconnected and encourages us to see how personal authenticity realized in cultural value is essential to the humanization of politics. Number 2, the starting point of the Church's witness and work for integral human promotion is the person who reflects God's presence in the world and has been created to live in community with other human beings and in interdependence with the whole of creation. When a person is a victim of injustice and oppression, this is an attack on the image of God and a severing of the bonds of freedom and mutuality that ought to characterize authentic society. The Church's witness to the gospel impels it to protect and nurture the image of God embodied in every person by ensuring that peace and righteousness be established, first between God and the human person, then between all peoples themselves, and finally between humanity and the whole of the created order. This call to reinforce the concern for justice should also include specifically justice for women. Number 3, Integral to the Church's mission of evangelization is the capacity and willingness to enter into the experiences and sufferings of those oppressed. It is on this basis of solidarity that the action of the Church becomes powerful as prophetic sign, both to those who are oppressed and to those responsible for the injustice. Concretely, this means that the Church will have to help people translate the call to a preferential option of the poor into hard political and economic programs. But in order to do this, the Church must always be at the service of the people, especially the poor. In this service, no matter how closely the Church may have been identified with power-holding classes of society in previous times, it now comes to be, in truth, a church of the poor. Number 4. The perspective on reality held by those who are the most oppressed and exploited in society constitutes one indispensable ingredient of the Church's theological task. Not only is this true in the context of the Philippine situation, but also other countries around the Pacific. Those doing theology in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, for example, affirm the conviction that not only must the Church live in solidarity with the most oppressed groups in society, as a necessary prerequisite for its witness and work in social justice, but also that precisely because these oppressed groups are marginalized by their society, the understanding of reality characteristic of the oppressed uncovers dimensions of that society hidden or refuted by the dominant group which oppresses. Therefore, for the Church to understand the true nature of society from the biblical theological perspective, it must incorporate these views from the underside into its theological task. Number 5. Hope must be rekindled within ourselves, within the Church, and within society. It is hope and trust that energized and brought out people power at IDSA, and it is hope kept alive which empowers people to stand against enormous odds, to commit themselves to creativity and healing in the midst of oppression, violence, and hatred. And finally, it is hope that empowers people to remain steadfast in the face of failure. This task of the Church, to call to hope, is crucial in an Asia where people have been taught by centuries of culture and tradition to believe that it is their fate to suffer. Arevalo, recalling the night of the EDSA event, writes, "We shall recall our own strength and hope, how that blessed night the Lord walked amongst us, and how the Lord visited his people." The Pacific Prism. As the Philippines enters the last decade of this century, it braces itself to face the challenges of the Pacific century in consonance with an anticipated shift of the geopolitical center from the Atlantic to the Pacific area. It is a very vulnerable time, a time of natural disaster, when life as we know it could be destroyed. But it is also a very creative time. It is a time when a new maturity of purpose and vision is demanded of its people. It is a time of cultural transformation as well, in the sense that there is a movement to reclaim what is truly Filipino in order to deepen and purify it. The challenge here is for Filipinos themselves to become real promoters of healthy Filipino culture. This means that as a people, Filipino men and women must begin to center their concern on the living traditions of the people. What are the values they live by now? What are the social structures these values reinforce and support? What is operative now in the tradition? A primary principle in this postponed process of indigenization may well be that it will take place when the church gets deeply involved in the whole life of the people. And by involvement, I mean to include everything that total and integral human development stands for. The church's approach to evangelization will then, of necessity, be holistic. What the Synod of Bishops in 1974 calls integral evangelization. The gospel must penetrate the whole way of life, the culture of a people, and this must be the overriding concern of the church's preaching. Only in this way will true transformation of Philippine culture take place. Only then can Filipinos as a people appreciate again their heritage from the West. Because we have now reached a point in history where the world is no longer a place where one society lives out its separate destiny, what happens in one country is bound to affect another. While countries around the Pacific region are cognizant of their influence on each other, it seems that churches in the West must also be made much more aware of the impact of their own government's political, economic, and military strategies have upon the life of people living in Asia. It is clear that the geopolitical strategies of the North Atlantic countries have a profound effect upon the countries in the Pacific. It has been noted, for example, that the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty brings Japan under the U.S. nuclear umbrella and is in potential conflict with the call for a nuclear-free East Asia. On the Philippine scene, democracy is once again flourishing. Christianity is stronger and continues to be a vibrant force in shaping the future of the country. Education and the arts are gracious amalgams of the indigenous and non-indigenous, putting together the best of three worlds: Europe, the Americas, and Asia. And yet, it has successfully, I believe, refracted them within its own cultural prism, and today reflects them in various forms to the rest of the world. The challenge then is to continue exploring creative and profoundly significant efforts to establish the conditions for sustained economic growth, despite the overwhelming problems which I have already indicated earlier. For as a nation, the Philippines recognizes that internal stability can be one of its most valuable contributions to the development of Asian countries. Its main strength in taking control of its future is its faith and its memory. Just as the Israelites on every Passover night retold the story of how Yahweh saved them, so we too, as a people, must remember, year after year, our passing to freedom at EDSA, and in our efforts to shape what is to come, to model the future in the Lord. Otherwise, the future will model us, perhaps in a way contrary to the values of Jesus Christ. We must gather our faith and our story in our hearts, that they might become a power there for the future. Thank you.
Well, I think you should remain sitting. Yes. Yeah. as I sat there listening to Lily talking to us, I suddenly realized that I'm seeing an Asian form of feminist theologians. There's so much fire in this, but she does not show it. There's so much undercurrent running underneath, but she is so placid. In her, I seem to be confronted with Asian women for century after century of suffering, still capable of delivering its message to Asian men and through Asian men to the rest of humanity. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your presentation. I will try to make my response and comments as brief as possible. But brevity is the promise theologians can make but cannot keep, or have no intention of keeping. There's so much in this paper, and there's so much to which I would like to respond. But fortunately, the other respondent, John England, has kindly shared with me his response. And as I briefly look through it, it contains much detailed comment on the paper. So I will leave the details to John England, and I will try to let the Spirit take me where it wills. Just a few preliminary remarks. I think it's very, very appropriate, and I'm sure Professor Cobb didn't plan this, didn't have this in mind when he put the Lily on the first place in this consultation. But I think it's, in hindsight, it's very appropriate to have us listen to Lily Quintos now, because Imelda Marcos is back in the Philippines. And with the election coming up next year, although she keeps saying she has no political intention, but that's a lie. So we will be hearing more about Philippines in the days to come. But speaking of Imelda Marcos, images, an image of 3,000 pairs of shoes, image of her palace, image of her resort, image of her luxurious apartment in New York City, collections of artworks, and so on and so forth. The images of people confronting the tanks, nuns with bees in their arms. You see, concepts freeze. And this paper is full of stories. A story liberates and gives rise to another story, and another story, and another story. And this paper also is full of images. Imelda Marcos and so on and so forth, people, revolution, people, power. And images also liberate and give rise to other images. So from the 1886 in the Philippines, with people power, the image of people power, led me to the image of the young Chinese person in white in 1989 in the Tiananmen Square, stopping the column of tanks in that fateful day, 1989. There, time comes to a standstill. Eternity intervenes. That's the image of images. Professor Chenjamin is not here, and I regret very much that he wasn't able to come. But that image does not take place within the church. It takes place outside the church. Most of the images that we come across, we witness in 1889 in the capital of China, come from people outside the Christian church. So I often am humbled when we speak of Christians taking part in revolution being prophetic. My experience in Asia, it's often the case. The people outside are more prophetic than people within the church. In Taiwan, probably in Korea, in the Philippines, we Christians are willy-nilly led into the turmoil of revolution. But still, we find ourselves in the midst of it and try to be in solidarity with the people. And that's one of the themes that Lily Quintos was developing in her paper. Now, with this paper, I will first briefly refer to the structure of it. And secondly, I'll try to say a few words about what hinders us from going from where we are, as I experience it, as I learn it with my colleagues in Asia. And of course, here I speak as an Asian out of my Asian background. Then thirdly, I'll try to share with you briefly some kind of theological vision that some of us are envisioning in Asia. Firstly, the structure of the paper. Lily Quintos began with the background of the Philippine people, and then that quickly led us into the social, political turmoil that confronted that nation. Themes of exodus, liberation, people's power, and so on and so forth, vibrating in her paper. But what attracts me most in this paper is found on pages 9 and 10. There, Lily pointed out the crucial matter that confronts the people of Philippines, and by inference, the people of Asia today, Christians doing theology. The importance of culture. Theologically speaking, the Philippine people, Filipinos, are poverty-stricken people. Forgive me for saying that. The 400 years of Spanish domination obliterated their cultures, even their names. She's Quintos, Aquino, Gonzalez. If you close your eyes and don't see the people in the Philippines, you have the fantasy illusion that you are maybe in one of the Latin American countries, or even in Spain. The recovery of your names and all things that go with it is a preliminary prerequisite of doing authentic theology in Asia. And I think I say this over and over again in Asia, particularly in the context of the Philippines. When we look at Asia as a whole, a few countries that have not been subjected to colonialism have resisted to this day the inroad of Christianity. Japan, for example. Thailand is another example. Christianity and colonialism. This continue to bother us, pain us, challenge us. When can we exercise the ghost of colonialism and get into the authentic business of doing Christian theology in the world of religious culture pluralism? I think the really faces this question, and she leaves the question at that. Again, I think that's the beauty of saying just enough. So she quickly goes back, or leads back to the social political situations from page 12, and giving us some of her ideas about our responsibilities in Asia and beyond Asia. This is my first part. Now, the second part of my comment is related to the section, 2 pages on cultures. In my own limited reading, meditation, thinking, and observation, almost simultaneously various theological developments have converged on one critical but seemingly unsolvable problem. We are all one in understanding, in emphasizing the importance of social, political involvement and solidarity. There's no question about whether it's in Latin America, North America, or in Taiwan, or in Korea and Philippines. This we all agree. But when we come to the question of culture and religions, there we waver. We are lost. We go back to where we started. That's our problem. And this is the problem that I and my colleagues in Asia have to deal with over the past 10 years. We have almost reached the threshold. We have claimed our people as our people. We have involved ourselves in the social, political agonies and sufferings of our people. We've been accepted back by our own people into our own society. But when it comes to the question of cultures and religions, we step back again. We become strangers once again. We become foreigners once again. See, this year I've been enjoying the privilege of having a sabbatical year from my school in Berkeley. And it's a wonderful opportunity. And I don't know who invented this, but for one, I can assure you, this is a wonderful invention. So this gives me a freedom to spend my time in Japan for a year. I've been to Japan many times, almost once or twice in Japan, but every time it's a short conference. You go attend the conference and you leave quickly without having the time to really in Japan. But this time, I've been there now for a couple of months. I visit temples. I conduct conversations with Buddhists and priests, but often I go to shrines, sometimes small shrines, to observe how simple, how mothers, children, with the children at their sides, go to the temple and telling me how to worship. It's that simplicity, that sincerity. The Buddhist ethos is deeply, to use a Japanese expression, shimikondeiru. It's like a smell. You cannot resist it. It saturates you. Now, what can you do to unsaturate that Buddhist ethos from Japanese people and infuse this militant, aggressive Christian ethos into them? And we haven't found the answer. Now, I think we have to do the theology all over again. This theological reorientation. We need to re-understand the place of history of Israel, the meaning of the church in the whole economy of God's salvation. In my own thinking, the starting point is not the person of Jesus, not the essence of the church, not the sacraments of the Christian community. It's Jesus and his reign of God. And here in this reign of God, we find community of people that suffer together, live together, hope together. Hope is another theme that Lily tries to address herself. Then from here we go back to the history of Israel once again, to the Bible, the New Testament, and then look at our own traditional theological orientations and concepts. From here, I seem to see emerging some theological jigsaw puzzle that replace our old traditional theological roadmap. Sometimes very frightening, sometimes very exciting. As a Christian theologian, the only confidence I have is that what I am doing is try to be faithful to the incarnation of the Word of God in God's own creation. So I think from here we need to readdress ourselves to this time-honored theological concepts such as salvation, the cross, evil, sin, church, mission. It's all very exciting here. We have to start from A again. What the liberation, Segundo talks about, liberation of theology. I think that's a prerequisite, precondition of our being able to do the theology of liberation. Then I think thirdly, this brings me to say a few words about what we have been doing in Asia for the past 10 years. Some of my colleagues are here. Dr. Yu Chu-lak, the Dean of the Southeast Asia Graduate School of Theology, and the director of the, he has many titles, wearing many hats, director of the Association of Theological Education in Southeast Asia, and also my colleague, Mr. John England, who has been working with us as the Associate Dean of the Program for Theology and Cultures in Asia. Our effort is, the aim of this program is to strengthen through concerted joint efforts the formulation of living theology and to facilitate the growth of creative theological community in Asia. There are some key words: joint efforts, living theology, creative theological community. I think this is the vision that some of us have tried to implement, to carry out with our colleagues in Asia. And in a sense, I see a kind of vision similar to this has motivated some of us to come here for this consultation. I believe what is needed now in Asia is not a kind of metaphysical theology talking about the concept of God, comparing it with the Hinayana Buddhist concept of God, or saying that Chinese Confucianism is just ethics, just no religion. I think what we need to have is how Christians and theologians can jointly become spiritual force, merging with other spiritual forces at work in Asia and the Pacific Rim, together creating prophetic voice for the Asia that continues to suffer for years to come, and for this earth that crying out from its depth, its sufferings and agonies at the hands of us humanity. If we can make some starting point at this conference, I think, then our presence here is more than justified. And finally, I'd like to thank Lily for getting us into this immense but worthwhile, exciting task of doing theology on the Pacific Rim. Thank you.
Please wait just a minute, because we have a few minutes for other people to raise questions. Most of our discussion of Lily's paper, where larger numbers will be participating, will be in the next 2 days. But we do have a little time now. If you have questions to address to either of those who have spoken this evening, please feel free to do so. Yes.
I am from the Philippines, and I really appreciate your presentation. It's very accurate and very forceful. However, I have a question about the church's role. You paint a picture of the church as a prophetic community, but the church has not been too prophetic in the past, in the history of the Philippines. In fact, it has been on the side of the rich and the oppressors on many occasions. The church has owned so much land, oppressed the people in many ways. The buildings of the cathedrals and the basilicas are from the sweat of the poor people who struggled so hard. The population explosion in the Philippines is so much of a problem that the church has not responded effectively to it. Can you say something about that?
I was referring to the particular time in history of the Philippines when the church became actively prophetic at the time of the Marcos regime. And if you recall also, I did say that there was a time, that's why in the theological, political section of my affirmation, I emphasized that it is to be a church for the poor and service, so that it will not again be seen as one that is trying to get more power as it has been in the past. So since the time of the Marcos regime, the church has been actively involved in trying to work out the different injustices, social justice questions. And when I say the church, I am including also the other ecumenical sectors in the Philippines and not just the Catholic Church. And I am including there the Christian community as a whole too, because as a people of God rather than just a hierarchy. Okay?
Would you respond to that reference that Imelda Marcos has returned? Why are the people greeting her, at least a segment of the people, so well? And what would be the church's response to her return?
Well, according to the news last night, which is very accurate, they were paid. And that's her style right from the very beginning. And so I hope that people outside the Philippines will recognize that and not take it as though she's really well received and welcome there. There are a few who would welcome her, but without the payment, I don't think anyone will appear the way they have appeared for Cory Aquino or any of the other politicians. Yes? Or,
Yes,
sorry.
please.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. There's just one line on page 5 which worries me. I am Indonesian and I come from the country where the majority of the people are Muslims. So the line which bothers me in this paper is where you say that the essential element, the intrinsic constitutive component of the soul of Filipinos is their deep Christian faith, and that this is very much a part of Philippine culture. Does that mean that the Muslims are not considered to be Filipinos and that they do not constitute part of the Filipino culture? Because as I said, in Indonesia, we often hear that it's only the Muslims who represent Indonesia.
I'm referring to the miracle of Edsa, and it was really the Christian faith that has been considered because the people who were also there were all Christians. And if you remember the way the islands are in the Philippines, Mindanao is on the other side, and there is no way. One of the reasons, let me put it this way, one of the reasons why they say that revolutions would never really happen in the Philippines, it's because of the way the islands are situated, and you can never really get a group. And that's one of the reasons why people from Mindanao would never have been able to come over, and I doubt too that they would have joined at that time, because they have their own particular orientation and vision and want to have their own independence as a group of people. And so I would doubt very much whether they would have really joined in the overthrow of Marcos, except to overthrow him in order to have their own independence.
I just want to relate it to our conference here. Thank you for your paper, Lily. It was very stimulating, brought out a lot of concerns, issues. But I was deeply moved by what Dr. Sia Song had to mention right towards the end regarding using these words, jointly, and living theology, creative theology, community, that, you know, even out of this conference, we might not just be following the traditional lines, but out of it will come out the kinds of theology in which there would be something that will really affect the whole culture of the Pacific, where society will be changed and people's thinking will be changed and the folkways will be changed. That something new, a new creation, new humanity, humankind, new lifestyle might be developed, and we need a theology for that. And I pray that, you know, as we meet together, being stimulated, that we'll come up with the kind of vision that will just make us move into this area where jointly, and we catch this concern that something new will be born that will come out of the Asian Pacific context, that'll, you know, not be according to the traditional approaches that we've been all exposed to, but something that is new and revolutionary, meaningful, that'll change things instead of just reacting to what has been happening, something proactive and new. I just pray that something like that will come out of this kind of conference.
Can I just follow up on that by asking quite bluntly, if you will pardon me, what does the conference hope to achieve, and how do you go about getting your results? I ask this question because I sense many exciting things are going to happen, and it will be very tragic if these exciting developments just come to an end at the end of our conference. As a follow-up of what you have said, how do we continue what will be accomplished here? Possibly because many are scholars, here a book will come out. But apart from or in addition to a book, what else do we especially want to see as follow-ups? CS has referred to the concentrated joint efforts being made in certain parts of Asia, and would be a waste of time and money if something similar like what he has said did not take place here after the conference.
I think the answer to that is that our hope is that some exciting things will happen, and that those who have come together will have some ideas about what they would like to see to be the aftermath. So the planners of the conference have not already decided what kind of follow-ups are appropriate. Now, I'm serious about that. I mean, our thought is that if when we get people like this together, things happen that are different from what happened when each of us stays in smaller regional groups. But we don't know what that will be, and we do not know how that could be followed up. I was quite struck just in this brief exchange, and I trust we'll discuss this much more. Those of us who live in countries which are predominantly Christian talk about ourselves and the role of Christianity in our society in one way. Those of us who live in societies which are predominant, in which Christians are a small minority, live in another way. Now, I think it becomes very important that we listen to each other very carefully, and it may be that how we then begin to reflect about the way we articulate our own concerns may be modified, and we may see some way of how that might affect the future. But I'm just picking up from an interaction that I found very interesting this evening. So the answer is, we don't know. We hope that this will be a topic that gets discussed during the fairly large blocks of time that we have for free discussion among the participants. But thank you for pushing us already to think in that direction. Probably we should not start another question at this juncture. It is 9:30. I would like again to thank both of our leaders this evening for having gotten us off to a fine start, and remind you we meet again here at 9 o'clock in the morning.